friends, welcome to class 2 of the crease pattern series, and we got a lot of stuff for you all. So this first part is just going to be flaps in the middle and also hinges, and then part 2 will be middle flaps and explaining that, and part 3 we will be covering Pythagorean or off-grid structures and how to pre-crease them. But yeah, so hope you guys are excited. Let's dive in. All right, so before we begin, I just want to give a small announcement for the class. Now, this class 2, will have 3 parts, and I'll be releasing these parts not all at once like I did the first class. This part 1 that you see now will come first, and in a couple days I'll release 2 and then 3. That'll just help me with timing and editing and allowing you all to not feel too burdened by the amount of content that comes out, because this class is definitely a bit more hefty than the last one. But yeah, all in all, let's start with flaps in the middle. Now, what are flaps in the middle? Now, it's not a formal term, but we can see by opening this example up. As you can see, there's 2 grid units with flaps, and this is just kind of a general convention that box pleat models tend to use. And the collapse is a little bit different than just edge folded Elias stretches. So let's see how to collapse this. The pre-creasing is pretty easy, and you all have experience with that from class 1, so I'm not going to show that, but print this crease pattern out for yourself so you can follow along and learn how to collapse these. All right, so now how to collapse these, what makes them different? Now we have our accordion grid and I pre-creased everything. So let's just start. Now, what happens when you start folding, or we're gonna start along these mountain folds along the middle just because it's easy, is generally we would want to follow our mountain valleys, right? So this seems very familiar to our Elias stretches. However, when you come to these portions, you'll notice that as I start to collapse it, it's going to push this flap up, therefore creating a flaps in the middle. And this can be really confusing when it's at a larger scale, because the models will be very hard to fold flat unless you do both sides at the same time. So I normally do both at the same time. Sometimes you won't be able to because there'll be other structures on the sides. So generally, what you can do is similar with the Elias stretches is follow the lines. So I'm going to see this is valley. I'm going to fold it. I'm going to acknowledge that this flap will be created. So I'm actually going to try to crease it as far as I can. Obviously not intruding on this side. And we're going to keep going. So once you get far enough, you'll see that the paper will really start to fight you. And that's generally when I call it to start on the other side. So as we can see here, we're getting to the second flap. I can still do kind of a ghost collapse, as I like to call it, before turning to the other side and collapsing it right here. So I'm going to show the other side again. Right, so we're going to start with this point. This is just like an Elias stretch, like this. And we're going to get to our first flap right here. Now there's 2 kinds of flaps that are shown. This flap generated in the middle is made of the diagonals being valley folds with the middle line being a mountain fold. The second flap on this side is formed by the diagonals being mountain folds and the middle being a valley fold. Now, this structure you might have seen if you did all the exercises for last class, and sometimes either one can be more difficult than the other when you collapse. You'll kind of figure out what's your preference, what's a little bit harder, what's a little easier, but hopefully when you look at a crease pattern, you can kind of identify, oh, this flap is a valley, mountain flap, while this one is a mountain, valley flap. In the grand scale, it doesn't matter too much, but it can help you know when to collapse it, if you want to collapse this part first or this flap second. But overall, as you can see, I'm literally just following our creases. And it turns out just fine. Very easy. If you have trouble with this structure, just keep practicing exactly this and you'll get the hang of it, and you'll start noticing how to collapse these in future designs. So here it is. As you can see, when we did both sides, it now lies flat. Now something special of this is the tail of this model, which is a face hugger designed by Donnie Origami, who kindly gave me permission to use this model in the video, as well as giving me permission to use the crease pattern and make a tutorial in the past. So this will be one of the exercises you guys will have the opportunity to make. After this class, you will actually have all the knowledge to fold this. Maybe not quite shape it yet, but collapse it as an exercise and just a challenge. And I think you all will like that. Other than that, you can kind of do some fun things with this structure. I won't teach this in this class as it's a little too advanced, but if you were designing or shaping, you can take this flap and do point splitting or edge splitting and get the same structure, but more flaps. And that's a whole folding sequence on its own. But yeah, I hope you guys understood this section. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm going to blow up this face up a little bit for you all to see, in case anything was hard to see or hard to understand. So here's the crease pattern. Here's how it comes together. And yeah, that's all it is for flaps in the middle. Pretty simple. So this is the second part one of class 2. And here we are talking about hinges. Now, there are 3 types of hinges shown here that are generally common for crease patterns. And there might be more, but these will be the most common 3 you will see. Now, what exactly are hinges? I'll cover that exactly in each one, but I like to say they are really confusing when you look at crease patterns, like the most confusing aspect ever. As you can see, this structure right here is literally an Elias stretch, and I just mountain folded it like that. And these form hinges. Now, for all 3 of these, I'm not going to show how they collapse or whatnot, just because it's really easy. It's more to explain how to identify these in crease patterns, because during a collapse, you can ignore them. As I showed here, you know, this is literally collapsed already. And if you look at this crease pattern, it's very easy to just get confused, and it looks a lot more complicated than it needs to be. So let me show a quick example of that really quick. And this crease pattern is the Basilisk by my friend Bodo Hag. He's a talented young designer in Germany. And thank you, Bodo, for letting me use your crease pattern here. This is one of my favorite designs of his. He has a lot of cool ones. But when I first made this model, I was extremely confused by the hinges. As you can see, this crease pattern is not Mountain Valley, which had me super confused. But hopefully after this section of the video, it shouldn't matter whether the crease pattern is Mountain Valley or if it's just black and white like this one, for you to identify hinges. Now, what are some hinges we can see here? We're going to take a look at that after we get through these 3. All right, so this first hinge is probably the easiest hinge ever. Say we have our 8x8 accordion grid, and if we just Mountain Valley along these lines, as you can see in our crease pattern, that is our collapse. And the hinges formed by these repeating diagonal lines is just this. That's it. Actually, the crease pattern, wait, this way, like that. There you go. That's all it is. That's all that there is to this structure. Now, if you were to look at this, it might look really confusing. You know, you might be wondering, are these Elias stretches? Are these reverse folds? No. And how you can identify that is the repeating pattern of valley, mountain, valley, mountain, valley, mountain. And as you see, if I open up this model, you have valley, mountain, and so forth. And that forms because when our layers are all compressed together and we do, say, a valley fold or a mountain fold, on the other side of the sheet, it'll be the opposite crease. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit about the hinges. They're very simple, and people or designers include them in crease patterns to show sometimes direction of shaping, direction flaps are supposed to form in, or to make the model flat folding, to generate models like this, or just to detect correction. So yeah, they don't have to be as hard as they seem. They're very, very easy. This one you'll see a ton. Here we have Hinge 2. Now Hinge 2 is the same as Hinge 1, except through a diagonal flap. So this could be an Elias stretch, just a diagonal line, as you can see here. But what happens when you collapse it and then apply the hinges is that the hinges will carry on in two directions. And again, if I open this up, you can see why. Right, you see these up here and right here, and they come together in the middle, which is when we fold over like that. Now these are highly confusing, especially when you go for pre-creasing the model. Obviously you don't need to pre-crease hinges. There's no point, just ignore them. But if you did pre-crease these, it'd take you probably like 5 times longer than it would just to pre-crease the model in general, which pre-creasing the model in general would just be dividing or folding in half, right? So don't lose time over folding hinges, but know how to identify them, so that maybe you can use them after the collapse for shaping, or to make the crease pattern look even easier, or as what it's supposed to be intended for the collapse. So this is hinge number 2 through a diagonal collapse. All right, now this is the third hinge, and this hinge, I actually want you all to practice collapsing, folding for yourself. The other two, they're really easy. You don't have to practice those, but practice this one. Now it might look very similar to the Elias stretches we did last class, and that's because it is. It's just an Elias stretch, and I added these 1 unit Elias stretches just to get the base to, look a little bit more helpful. And as you can see, you all can fold this if you got through class 1. Now, what is this hinge? How is it different than the others? This is using that 2-grid packing concept that I mentioned previously. And what happens is if you have these 2 diagonal flaps and you put them towards the middle, right? What we learned before is, it'll just, there should be another valley fold here and it collapses like this. However, if your model is the 2-grid width, then when you open it up, it's going to lay a little bit differently. It's going to lay flat. And you don't need to pre-crease these hinges going all the way down. They just happen automatically when you open it up and crease below here, just like that. If I flip it over on the underside, you can kind of see where there would be folding or creases. And then if I open it up, you can see those diamonds appear just like that. So you can definitely see, if you were folding a crease pattern that you noticed all these diamonds going down, it might look pretty scary, right? But don't worry, it's just an Elias stretch. Yeah, don't pre-crease those. Just know that that's how the model collapses and lays flat. So try this one out. It's pretty good. And I'll show you guys an example of what it means to look scary with this crease pattern, which we'll bring back in the next part as well. This is the Slop Agera by Jacob Stubbleton. And thanks, Jacob, for letting me use this crease pattern in this video as well. If you all look through the middle, you can see all these diamonds going down, and even in here. Again, these are all hinges to let it lie. in that 2 grid width form factor. If you haven't seen, I folded this one as well as Jacob folded it. Check out some of those photos, you'll see what we mean. But yeah, so final applications for this part of the class. Now this part was fairly simple, not too much folding, but the exercise I want you all to do should help you out a ton until the next class, which will release in a few days or so. So again, we're back at the Basilisk by Bailo. Here is my recent fold of it from 30 centimeter paper. Now, I don't recommend going out and trying to fold this yet, but take the crease pattern and try to identify the hinges. Now, if you want to do that for this specific one, pause the video because I'll spoil it for you all. But here we go. So here, this section, we have the head. Now, these diamonds, these are not hinges. These are actual structures to make the feathers in the head. The hinges are these, right here. So if you were to try to collapse these, it just wouldn't make sense. So what are they? Now, if you look at the wings, these two, these are the wings. And if you look here, you can see that after I collapsed it, I folded all the way through the layers. And that is exactly like the first hinge I showed you all, where literally it's just flaps together, folded. So fairly simple, right? Now we get over to here, we see the same thing. These are for the legs and the tail section. So the tail is a little bit more complicated, and so are the legs, because this is an asymmetrical design. And the hinges explain how to orientate the legs and the tail so that they can complete the model and make it look non-asymmetrical. So if you look closely underneath the model, you'll notice the flaps. You can kind of see the hinge run along here, and this leg actually wraps all the way on top of the collapsed base here, and that's kind of what this middle section's going on. Similarly, the tail, this will actually fold in half and collapse upwards, and all these hinges kind of explain how to orientate it so it actually points out like a tail. Pretty simple. Obviously, you don't need to pre-crease these like I explained. Please don't pre-crease hinges. But yeah, so now if you didn't do that with this one, I recommend you go out. You can go to Bailo's Origami Instagram page. He has a ton of crease patterns on there, and he has the hinges on them. Find a couple, try to identify the hinges. You can send them to me if you want me to reaffirm if you're correct, or you can probably ask Bailo. He's a very nice guy. But yeah, go find some more crease patterns, try to find these different structures, and good job for making it through the class. Now, I mentioned before that the face hugger will eventually be an exercise. There is going to be an exercise video after the other 2 parts of the class that'll contain 2 exercises, this and another one. So don't worry about folding this yet. Just wait, and that will be later. Other than that, thank you all for watching. Follow me on Instagram to ask me questions and whatnot, and subscribe if you want to see the rest of this class. Just like the other parts of the class, these crease patterns will be on my Flickr. There's going to be a link in the description linking to all of them, and that link will be a folder that will populate as the other parts of the class come out. Awesome. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.
All this origami got me going kamikaze. Now I'm